Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, director of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, and it's my pleasure to be your host for tonight's conversation with artist Carl E. Hazlewood, curator Serubiri Moses, and writer and critic Rinaldo Walcott. We're presenting this event tonight in connection with the exhibition Infinite Passage, a retrospective of Carl's work that was curated by Serubiri and is on view here at the Brattleboro Museum through July 6th. You can learn more about the exhibition as well as the 7 other exhibitions we currently have on view on the museum's website, which is brattleboromuseum.org. Toward the end of tonight's conversation, we welcome you to take part in a Q&A with the presenters. Carl, Serubiri, and Rinaldo will happily respond to your questions and comments at that time rather than during the conversation itself. So if you'd like to submit a question or a comment, please use the Q&A button on your screen. You can type in there at any time, but we'll wait until the end of the conversation to get to all the questions and comments. Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask our presenters to join me on screen by turning on their cameras and unmuting themselves. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of them as they come on. Here they are. I'll start with Carl. Carl Hazlewood was born in Guyana, South America, and came to the United States as a young man. He now lives and works in the New York area. Carl earned degrees from Pratt Institute and Hunter College. In 1983, he co-founded Algira, a center for contemporary art in Newark, New Jersey. He's had solo exhibitions up and down the East Coast and has been the recipient of 2 McDowell Fellowships, among others. Carl uses the structural language of abstraction as a clarifying act of progress in what he considers an unstable world. Broadly speaking, his approach to his work and life seeks to counter the notion that there may be limitations on what he should do or what he can achieve. Carl, thank you for being here and for giving us the opportunity to exhibit your work at our museum. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great being there in residence.
Yeah. Next, Serubiri Moses is a Ugandan curator and author based in New York City. His writing is primarily concerned with aporia, violence, and exhibition histories. His exhibitions are rooted in methods of collective teaching and alternative epistemologies. His recent peer-reviewed article on the Johannesburg Biennale, titled "Why Exhibit Trauma?" appears in the journal Southeast of Now. Serubiri serves as part-time faculty in art history at Hunter College and visiting faculty at the Center for Curatorial Studies at Bard College. He previously held teaching positions at NYU and the New Center for Research and Practice. And he's delivered lectures at Williams College, Yale University, University of Pittsburgh, and the New School, among others. Serubiri, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
I had to look up aporia, which, as I understand it, refers to a state of perplexity or doubt, and it's such a great word.
Doubt.
I've already learned something. And finally, Rinaldo Walcott is professor and Carl V. Granger Chair of the Department of Africana and American Studies at the University of Buffalo. He is a writer and critic. His research is in the area of Black diaspora cultural studies, gender and sexuality, with interests in nations, nationalisms, multiculturalism, policy, and education. As an interdisciplinary Black studies scholar, Rinaldo has published in a wide range of venues on everything from literature and film to theater, music, and policy. His articles have appeared in scholarly journals and books, as well as newspapers, magazines, and online media outlets. He often comments on Black cultural life for radio and TV. He has edited, co-edited, and authored numerous books, including On Property, Policing, Prisons, and the Call for Abolition, which was nominated for the Heritage Toronto Book Award, was longlisted for the Toronto Book Awards, was a Globe and Mail Book of the Year, and listed in CBC Books Best Canadian Nonfiction of 2021. Rinaldo, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you guys, I'm going to turn it over to you now. I'm going to disappear. I'll let you all take it away. And when you're ready to field some questions from the audience, just let me know and I'll come back on screen to help facilitate that.
Okay, thank you, Danny.
Okay.
So I'll share my screen and maybe we can start there with the exhibition itself. Thank you everyone for joining us. I just want to give a little bit of an overview of the current exhibition before we get into the conversation, and hopefully some of the works that I introduce may guide us in our discussion. So a very brief overview. It's an exhibition of works by Carl Hazlewood, Carl E. Hazlewood, who has been introduced already. And it is co-curated with K. Anthony Jones, who is an art historian currently based in Baltimore. And the exhibition basically is a retrospective that features works between the 1990s to date. Not all of them are paintings, and some of them are actually more new media works. Others are primarily installation works. And I think the main content of it, or the main thrust of it, is in this title, Infinite Passage, which refers to movement, movement in life, movement in painting, movement in history, but also the historic migration or the historic movement of African descendant people from the continent into the diaspora. So moving forward, this is a work called Citadel for Anansi. And I think, this was the primary, I think this is the regarded as the centerpiece of the exhibition. It was a work that was produced on site. As a curator, I gave Carl the biggest wall, so to show. So extremely jealous in a sense, because could have put a lot more work there. It was produced in about 2 or 3 days. Carl, maybe you can clarify that time frame. What I want to say about it is that this installation was prioritized so that the exhibition as a whole could respond to the site and could become site specific. And by that I mean that we could by requesting Carl to make a work that's going to be destroyed eventually, and this is the only iteration of this work to exist, we were also aware of the fact that this work is directly in conversation with the actual architecture of this building, which is a former train station turned into an art center and museum. So the form, I want to say here that the form here is not only abstract. So we heard in the introduction, as Danny said, that Carl's work is primarily that of abstraction, but I think the form of this work is not only abstraction. You do see the drops, right? Those drops, which are actually drops, and they are drops of water. And also curatorially, this work, as I said, is a centerpiece of the exhibition, but it refers to that notion of the transit and the transitory, which is a very important concept, and the transitory site itself, which acknowledges the infinite passage or the infinite space, the infinite movement, etc. I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 other works. So these, just to give you a sense of, these are installation photos of the exhibition. Yeah, I will talk about this briefly. This is a kind of, it's also in itself another quasi centerpiece that is in the exhibition, or a secondary sort of point. And one of the works that we're looking at here is Blackhead Anansi. An important provocation, which has less to do with the form, whether it is painting or whether it is new media or assemblage or installation or a site-specific drawing, but rather in relation to the spoken tales of Anansi, or the spoken tale of Anansi. Anansi is a trickster spider that is that appears in oral narratives throughout the Caribbean and in South America, where Guyana is located. A character who always has a way out of trouble. Um, we're not exactly sure if Anansi is always the one creating the trouble, though. But Anansi always has a way out of trouble. And in this case, Anansi becomes an avatar from which to celebrate the African diaspora culture, from which this character emerges, which also has its ties, its um, culture, which ties back to West Africa, specifically in Ghana, where there is a very prominent connection to Anansi as well. So more views from the exhibition. This work specifically is also another point, I would say another secondary point curatorially for us with Anthony Jones. And the title, Demerara, is a very important one. This is a real place in Guyana. And also, I think I was thinking about these 2 paintings from the point of view of address. I don't know if that makes sense. I think that when you think about works which speak and communicate, I thought of these 2 works specifically as which do precisely that. Now, the central concept or the central idea in these works considers the landscape in which these buds or blooming buds appear. And that is a concept that, of course, is central in Carl's art. I think the earliest I think I could find was a reference in Carl, in your master's thesis from 1977, where you talk about how primary the landscape is in your artwork even back then. Um, and you did share with me a work that I will share with everyone here as well, a landscape drawing, a landscape painting that you made in the mid-60s when you had returned to Guyana for the first time after leaving. But I wanted to also leave you with this provocation. If Carl is considered to be primarily an abstract artist, then what we see here is evidence of something else, and an identifiable figure, and also a landscape that we can engage with in ways that are not purely abstract, conceptual, or sensorial, but are also imaginative, fictive, beautiful, elaborate, and also which which invite us to engage with the work and the entire exhibition as a whole in different ways. So I guess I'll invite Rinaldo Walcott and Carl to maybe I'll invite Rinaldo first, I guess, to just to yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you to Buffalo and to you, Serubiri, for inviting me into this conversation with Carl Hazlewood. It's an honor. I feel lucky and privileged to be in this conversation with someone whose work I admire. I know that, Serubiri, in your presentation just now, you you gave a larger spread to Carl's work as bigger than abstraction, but I want to begin with abstraction because I think that there's something really important for the Black artist when it comes to abstraction, and especially in a moment where figurative work um, had achieved for a brief moment such a tremendous celebration, only to see it collapse in some areas. So recently, the African American artist Torkwasi Dyson, in an interview, was asked about her own work as an abstract artist. And this is some of the responses that she gave, Carl, and I'm wondering how you might connect with some of these responses. First, she said that for her, abstraction was a kind of a tool or a philosophy. And then she followed that up with something like, for her, abstraction is a code of language, uh, a code of language of liberation. And then finally, she said that for her, and I think she was intoning this as a Black person who's a descendant of enslaved people, that she was surviving an abstraction, meaning that Blackness had been made an abstraction with abstraction. And Carl, I wonder how you see yourself in relationship to those kinds of claims about abstraction.
I think all those approaches are sort of relevant. They sort of are layered into each other because for me, especially because of the way I began, as an artist, as self-taught, more or less, at the beginning, I didn't bring that academic approach to what I did, but I think how I approached my work was sort of part of the way the way I existed at that time as a child, because my journey began as a kid, alone, um, being taught at home, because I was ill. I was homeschooled mainly, and I was left sort of with my thoughts and with books. And from out of that, I developed a sort of if you could say it's a working philosophy, something that actually existed that I worked through to express my own ideas about the world, of what I saw through my window and what I saw in my head as I read all these books around me. My mother had all these books, the European books, Shakespeare, the classics, and so on, which I read on my own, more or less, as a 11, 12-year-old. These became sort of the furniture that I used to set up my own vision of the world itself, So it's my how I began. There wasn't that dichotomy for me about realism and abstraction to begin with. I thought, art is art. It expresses something that you have inside, a sort of creative force, almost like a religious kind of thing, uh, but to it was a way for me to engage with the world, because as a child alone, I spent a lot of time alone, reading and so on. It became it became a way of connecting to reality. If I painted those images outside my window, the palm trees and whatever, it sort of made me real, more or less. So the realism was from the outside, that was made real by my experience in it and sort of replicating it in a way. But but there was something else, I think, for me that was always not missing, but I knew there was something else there aside from just looking at something and, making a copy of it. The way I saw the world, I think it interacted with my physical body, the way I saw the world, because I have very bad eyes. I saw colors, big blobs of things, When I got my glasses as a little kid, I saw trees, trees were made of little leaves, little tiny leaves. And I said, oh my God, look at all this stuff, birds flying in the sky. Wow. It was sort of a revelation, because before that, everything was a blast of color and light. So I think that allowed me to connect to people like Turner in the books I read, Turner with the landscapes and the seascapes, which were a big blast of color. And later on, I connected people like, Olitsky in the mid 70s and so on. These things, this seemed to be a natural approach for myself. The political layer on top of it came later as I became more aware of the world around myself and how I fit into that, especially after I moved to the United States. At the time we moved, Guyana was going through a very intense political situation, fighting for independence and this and that. It was not specifically about the skin color. So I was not self-conscious in that sense of this great blackness that sits upon us all the time, as it was in the United States. But there were these differences between all the various peoples in Guyana, which were Black people, African descendants of Africans, and the descendants of Indians who came as indentured servants to replace the African people. And of course, there were the Portuguese who came also as indentured servants to begin with. But people, they meet, they mix, they love, they hate, they kill each other. And at this point, we were fighting, it was a nationalist fight. We wanted to be independent from the United Kingdom, which was, the mother country. So we were fighting against our parent. We were rebelling, and, they were putting people in jail. Things were burning, they set people against each other. They were, the city was burning, they set Indians against blacks and so on, there were all these undercurrents and political undercurrents that they assumed that we didn't know what was going on. But I don't know. I think I was a little too young to respond to that in an assertive way at that time. Our little family, what we were focused on was my health, which was failing as we went along. As time went by, I got weaker and weaker, and my mom, saw this article in the newspaper, about this great doctor, Dr. Michael E. DeBakey, who had created an artificial heart, and he was this genius. I don't know how she did it. Parents, mothers are fantastic people. Somehow she found this person, this address. She wrote to them. She described my symptoms. Next thing, a week or so, a letter came. You're admitted to Baylor Medical Center. Just enough time, a month or so to get there, and it was up to us, to my mother, to find a way to get there, raise the money, all these things, So all these things, there's a political things, there's environment that's happening around me, there's landscape, there's my internal conflicts, and both physical and psychic and all these kind of things, the things I read, the things I responded to in the environment, all these things mixed together and became part of the expression that I use. It was both visual and literary, because one of the things my mother would do as a homeschooling technique, she left her instructions were, when she left in the morning, said, I want to see something when I come back. I want to see an essay or a story or a poem or something written. Don't worry about the grammar and the correction. We'll correct that. But I want to see something that you have done when I get home. Don't go outside, but do this thing. Of course, being curious and stuff, I did go outside, I dug in the mud because I read, people made clay statues and stuff. So I dug in the mud. I didn't know you had to have special clay or whatever, but I made my little heads and little this and that, I cut branches and made things. And my mother, when she comes home, she would very carefully not notice that I had to go outside to do these things. But she would read the things I had, the stories I made, or the poetry I wrote, and carefully picked up the watercolors that I had strewn all over the front yard, because I would make these things so quickly and they would be flying all over. And but she would put them all together, clip them together, and there it was. This is a start. This was a start of my practice, as I said. That's why I'm always reacting against the that word practice for myself, because to me it's never practice. It's just my life, So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Oh, you did. Oh, yeah, you did. It's fascinating, beautiful story, beautiful snapshots. And now I want to ask you more questions about your mother, but that might not be appropriate. But she sounds like an
no,
absolutely,
it's really
absolutely
interesting.
fascinating woman. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, I think for people in the Caribbean and immigrants in general, what we tend to focus on is advancement. And advancement means education. It means getting a good job, becoming, if you have the ability to become a lawyer or a doctor or that sort of thing. my mother was very focused on education, and she's a very strict person, but she never, ever said, you can't be that artist. Other people would say, well, you want to be a starving artist, but she never did that. She just provided the materials. If I needed paint, she went out and got it. I was painting so much, those drawing books that people have, that kids have. I would go through that in a day, So after a while, she at the office, she made these thick drawing books, painting books out of her office materials. She made these big books and stapled them together, made covers, and so I wouldn't ever run out of materials, because I was down to, back home we have something called pointer, which is the rib from the coconut tree. You have the long leaves, and there's a rib in the middle. So I'd strip off the soft parts and chew the ends to make a brush, because I go through brushes so fast with the commercial things, So this is part of my environment. But my mother was special. She had lots of talent. She sang, she did this, she did that, she taught. And eventually she opened a school so that she could be home with me, since I couldn't run around most of the time. Occasionally she would send me to school, more or less to socialize me, so I would be able to talk to people. I never learned that. So I'm so awkward in that way. But yeah, she's a remarkable person who eventually, in the last couple of decades of her life, became an artist, a real visual artist, got degrees and showed in museums and sold work and stuff like that. So that maybe one day I'll sit down and write about that.
You must.
It only became a thing after having to do things like this. I talk about it, and I say, oh, well, my mother wasn't exactly a run-of-the-mill sort of person. So yeah, so that's all we have. She was a single parent, so me and my brother and my sister. She's one who worked, took care of us, taught us. She opened that school, and she taught a lot of people. People who became doctors and lawyers, like they wanted to. People went out into the world, to London, Oxford, and to Yale, and so on. And but at that point, when I was very ill, she put on concerts. She did concerts at the local town hall, music and so on, where people paid to come, and she raised money within a month or two, and people who she helped donated to the cause, which was me. So it was sort of interesting looking back, but yeah, but all through that time, it's the books, the literature, the tales of from Treasure Island, or British books that were illustrated with some, say, pre-Raphaelite paintings, like the famous one we've all seen that one of Ophelia floating in the water, with lots of details. All that stuff was like fascinating to me. So all that stuff was furniture, the thing about blackness or whatever. But it wasn't the most important thing, because our experience in the Caribbean, especially in Guyana, it was a sort of multicultural thing, because I could look at my family. I didn't give you a picture, but I could look at my family and see everybody, they're blonde, blue eyes, they're Indians, they're black like me, whatever, And you have all these variations because of our long history as a colony, and being used by various people. The company bookers from London, who give all these prizes and so on. They made their money by running Guyana, with sugar and all these industries. It's a complex, layered thing. But I think for a lot of us who were thoughtful or felt things, this was a source of creativity. It was where poetry came from. It was where novels came from. It was although we were a little slow on the visual side, because it was hard to live as a person through visual art. It's not a small country, but it's a small population. So all these things, were meaningful, to me, and later on I found out to other artists who came out of Guyana. Frank Bowling, for instance, in a different the countryside. He's a very bright person.
Carl, could I share some
sure.
slide?
Sure. Go ahead.
Let me share some slide.
Yeah. So this piece I did after I had my operation. We lived in the United States for several years, and to become permanent, you had to get off of the American soil or whatever. So we went home thinking we'll be home for a couple of months and go back, but we ended up staying like a year or two, like 2 years. And while I was there, I'd already started experimenting with abstraction, but returning home, and there was the smells, the vegetation, the earthiness, and I watched this storm blow up like out of the blue. It was bright and everything, and all of a sudden there was this thing. So I was trying to paint it as fast as possible. I think I did this painting in like half an hour, trying to catch up with the clouds and so on. This was a scene from out of my my window. This is Le Repentier. That's actually, it used to be a plantation, but what you're seeing is it's a burial ground, cemetery. It's a pretty vast cemetery. This is just a little bit of it, So but this was a view out of my window. The palm trees and so on, all marching together. There's a little canal that the Dutch built. The Dutch, Guyana is pretty much like Holland. It's flat. It's below sea level, and they designed the city the way they designed. They designed the like Amsterdam. Very geometric. The canals go one way and the streets goes the other way, and so right in front of us was this canal. We call it a punt trench because the punts carried cut what do you call this, sugar cane in these things, and it moved in these big punt barges, I guess. They moved up and down this canal, and over that canal was a place we call the back dam, just where these front trees are. And as you go to the right, it got more and more like bushy and so on. I mean, people like criminals and so on, when they're hiding from the police, they would come to the back dam and try to hide and so on. So it was very, interesting thing to watch. Sometimes, stuff is happening, there, during rainfalls, when the rain's falling in the evening, you would see floating in the dark, you'd see these like little glowing emeralds on the surface of the water. These were the eyes of alligators. I think not alligators. I think what we have, they were called caimans. They were like sharp-nosed alligators, but they would rise to the surface to enjoy the rain coming down. So you look through your window, and this is what you see in the dark. Eyes are glowing. You look up. There's this the sun is going down, the moon is rising. The moon, I guess where we were on the equator or whatever, the moon comes up as this big squashy, orangey thing, which slowly as it rises, it got, more and more its form. It got cooler as it went up and smaller, all these things, at least I noticed. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. But where we lived, it was an old plantation. Although you've written about it as a plantation I was born in, I wasn't born there, but that's where we moved to as a kid. And when we moved there, I think it was in the 50s or something, or 60s. It was a new area of development. So where we were was housing, but it was very dark at night, and there was bushes on one side. Eventually, houses got built and became a suburb and so on all around us and so on. It was very interesting. I watched the cars, the trucks bring bricks and remove clay and this and that, all this stuff, the smell of all that. But I think I started talking about why I did this painting. But this is an oil painting I did, after going away and having my operation and living in America for a while, going to school for the first time, real school, which was Jack Yates, it was called, very nearest. A very advanced school. It was for Black people. I mean, when we got to America, it was exactly at the time when marches were going on. I think it was 64. Remember, it was Houston. I remember seeing the remnants of Black, this white fountain, Black fountain, whatever. And we heard about the marches going on, and we were in the South, but deeper South, the march was going, but it didn't affect us. If you're living in history, sometimes you're not aware of the history you're living in. It's not part of your direct experience, until you look back at it. So I went to a Black school, but a very advanced Black school. It was air conditioned. It was beautiful. Going to classes there was terrific. The first time I went to an art class. I mean, they weren't teaching me anything, but they provided me materials. After they saw me painting and doing whatever, every couple of weeks, I would see a big pile of stuff on my desk. I'm looking around and say, what the heck? Did somebody leave their stuff here? There was a box of paints there, somebody left their paints here. What is this? And very casually said, oh no, it's yours. The class got together and bought me, these boxes of, the paint box with all the paints in it and a little palette and stuff. So it was sort of a good time, and I got to be a little bit more social at that point. And right near me also was it was Texas Southern University with the creator of the art department was Dr. John Biggers, a terrific painter himself. And my mom was acquiring another degree while we were there, and I would go to wait for her. It was walking distance from my home, and of course I would wander the corridors. I would, either I would be in the library or I would wander the corridors looking at the murals and stuff that emanated from the art department. And the Dr. Biggers saw me wandering and said, "What's this kid doing?" So he said, "Oh, come with me. I'm painting this person." So he'd take me to the studio in the school and put me next to him, and we would be drawing from the same model, and he never told me what to do, but it was an education to watch him work, his drawings and so on. And I think that was the first time I sort of connected with an artist, Um, so
I'm gonna take this.
Yeah, I think what you've said has been absolutely fascinating in terms of biography and your own development and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And twice you used the term furniture,
ah,
which I find really interesting and provocative, as a way to think about all the bits and pieces that make up memory and that make up history. And your work um, has history and memory so beautifully weaved into it, from the titles of the work to the landscape, um, to the way in which you talk about it, right? And I'm wondering if you might say something about the importance of the Anansi figure in your
oh,
work. Are you the Anansi figure, or are you playing with the Anansi figure, or
yes.
are you doing both? And what are we as viewers to make
Uh,
this engagement with history and memory? Because I have a memory of Anansi, but my memory of Anansi is of old women telling us Anansi stories to have us fall asleep, and as kind of moral lessons.
right.
But of course, we know that Anansi is a trickster. He can be, I'm going to put the he in quotation marks, can be cunning and so on. Your deployment of Anansi. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I worked for a good while when I returned, and I'm doing my painting and doing something, and the painting that interested me was the work. Of course, I'm interested all art, but what I was focused on as a young painter was the more formalist element of painting. Stella, Nolan, that sort of thing. And but it was not always, as I developed, it was not always enough. It's beautiful. It satisfied me, the formalism, the weights and the measures of things, of color and form, and how it fits the canvas, the flatness or the depth, and all these things. It's those things still interest me, and but uh, because the idea of being in America and being sort of there's this oppressive almost presence of that one has to be aware constantly of who one is. You have to reinforce your identity. People use identity all the time. It's it 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 became this sort of thing that one couldn't escape. So I began to think a little bit of well, it almost crept in without my consciousness doing it, but I began to relate what I did in certain ways to the person that I am. It was always me, but in a conscious way. And I thought about my place in the world, my place in this world, and my place in this country, my place back home in Guyana. And it was, and I thought the idea of Anansi was, I have two, I use two things, the black head
Mm-hmm.
and the Anansi. I think I'm both of these things, and a lot of us are both of these things. The Anansi is a survivor, and I thought of ourselves as consummate survivors of all sorts of situations, both social and spiritual and practical and so on. It's always a sink or swim kind of thing. And Nancy was this transformer. He could be anything. He could be part man, part insect. He could be male or female. He's very fluid, and he's always in trouble. Like we are. We are always in trouble, whether we created ourselves or it comes from the outside. The thing is, one survives, and I connect them with. I don't know if you ever looked at the Bugs Bunny characters, cartoon thing. He's that same kind of person, He sometimes he enjoys life, but sometimes he's in dire trouble that he makes or he gets into. That sort of trickster thing. That's what Anansi is, and I identified with him, and also I identified with the fact that he's a web spinner. He spins a web for, like you spin a story, you also spin connections. And I thought of, because of our specific kind of person, especially the Caribbean person, we're so connected with each other, ethnically, racially. No matter how we got there, and our experiences and all these connecting things that become a web of experience and a web of relationships that connect us to all over the world, not just Africa. It's important. Africa is important, but all these things are other things are ours by blood, and it's important that we take control of those things, the things that we can, and things that we need to demand to take control of. So that is the sort of the overall the background against which I make things, whether I write a poem or write an essay or a story or I paint a picture or I organize an exhibition or whatever. All these things become part of that furniture that you mentioned, the furniture of the mind and of experience.
I wanted to jump in here just to because I also know that we have an audience and maybe they have some questions as well. But Rinaldo, maybe you could continue asking. Maybe you have one other provocation before we go to the audience.
I mean, it's interesting, just one, and it's really interesting and was fascinating to hear you, Carl, talk about reading all of the literature and poetry simultaneously with being a kind of self-taught artist and how that all combined. And you already invoke Frank Bolden. And I was thinking about like who are the other Guyanese thinkers and artists that seem to have this kind of imagination that is really expansive and capacious. And of course, the first person that came to mind for me was the novelist and essayist Wilson Harris, the late Wilson Harris.
Yes.
But then also I was thinking about Tom Fieldings and in his own work, which is not abstraction, but actually leads into abstraction. Particularly I'm thinking about Tom Fieldings, his book, The Middle Passage, which is these fantastic pencil.
Yeah. Well, actually, as I told you, I was co-founder of Al Jarreah Center for Contemporary Art. One of the first exhibitions we did was of Tom's work, The Middle Passage. We showed an exhibition of all those individual drawings, and it was fantastic. It was fantastic. Although Tom Fieldings was not Guyanese, he lived in Guyana for quite a while, and and he was a friend of the other co-founder, Victor Dawson, and who lived in Guyana long after I left. But you know, so it's appropriate, you know, the idea of the Middle Passage. You know, it's something we, you know, we don't have to be American or whatever, you know, we have inherited this movement, this constant awareness of this movement from here to there to you know, to the transformation that happens between here and there, and how we adjust where we land, you know, whether it's in you know, whether it's in North Carolina or in New Amsterdam, Guyana, or New Amsterdam, New York. You know?
New York.
So it's all interconnected. You know, the Dutch West India Company, you know, was the same people who were here in New York as they were in Guyana at the same time. You know, so these experiences over time and over space and so on, it's all it's that Nancy Webb that I talk about, you know, and the blackhead experience, you know, that's you know, I read, you know, I was using the term blackhead, and I, by accident, not too long ago, I came across a thing that there's a place called the Blackhead Junction after what's the big revolt in America, that the violent overthrow of slave revolt. What's
Are you talking about
But in Haiti,
the Nat Turner revolt?
Yes, the Nat Turner. Okay, there's, you know, how people were so scared of the white people because he was so vicious about, he killed everybody. You know, he was a very smart guy, very well read, and so on. But you know, he was merciless. Anyway, so after that, the people were merciless in killing black people and so on. What they did, they stuck heads on poles at,
oh,
at a place, at a specific place, and it was called Blackhead Junction. Blackhead Junction.
wow.
So it's interesting. It's interesting, you know. So, but there's all these things, you know.
Yeah.
History hangs echoes, you know.
So maybe let's move to the to the audience. Danny, I don't know if we can, you know, take any questions from the audience. And
Sure.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, all three of you. This has been totally fascinating, as expected. So yes, please, those of you in the audience, if you have any questions or comments for anyone here, please go ahead and use the Q&A button to add those now, and we'll get to those. And if we have moments to fill in between audience questions, I have a million things
you have a question. So Danny,
swirling
you
around
go
my
first.
mind right now.
Danny,
So
go first, and then we'll go to Alice George. Yeah.
That's kind of you, Serubiri. I would really I'd actually love to take Alice's question,
Okay.
and then I'll be happy to
Sure.
ask
Sure. Sure. So Alice asked,
Mhm.
can you talk about the materials you use in your work and how you choose them?
Oh, well, that's also I think that's sort of comes from my childhood again. In learning how to paint and stuff, I learned how to use materials from reading books. So I would create you know, the materials from reading how to make you know, the surface of how to stretch a canvas, how to make it, how to make sizing, you know, how to do this and that, how to make charcoal, you know, all this stuff as a kid, you know, you put it on this fire, you burn it, you know, all this stuff. So I think I was always super sensitive to the materials of making, and it didn't matter to me whether it was pastel or oil paint. I didn't realize all that stuff was important until I came to America, and people just painted with oil paint all the time, or they painted with watercolor all the time, or they just did still lives. I did everything, and as a way of teaching myself. And I think my idea of using materials was it was constant. So when after working with Aljara for a long time, and I wasn't focused totally on my art. When I returned, I asked myself, what should I do? Should I paint? I didn't want to do that right away, so I used the materials that I had around me, which was a lot of paper, canvas, whatever, and I use them together. Eventually, I use all those stuff together. There are things that are layered, and collaged with paper, with canvas, with roofing material, everything. It was fair game, even digital media, So there are layers of digital media. I stitch things into the canvas and so on. My idea is, if you're going to work on something, make something that's significant, that people can respond to in all sorts of ways, whether it's intellectual or sensual, in a sensual kind of way. That people want to touch, or that engages their mind in some way. Maybe it's a puzzle. What is that? Is that a print, or is that painting? What is that? It's just part of the fun in what I, because I want to have fun doing what I do. This is my second childhood, so I need to have fun.
And then there's a second question here from Karen Becker. Please explain Anansi, but maybe Rinaldo can do that, and then
Okay, I'll do it really briefly. So Anansi is a figure, a folktale figure, usually represented as a spider slash man, who particularly traveled with the enslaved Africans to the Caribbean. And he appears in a number of folk tales, engaging in a number of different kinds of things. Sometimes he's a trickster, sometimes it appears he's causing the trouble himself, and the idea is that Anansi tales, which are mainly told to young children, are kind of these moral lessons. And they're about how you can survive and get by on being smart and clever, as opposed to, the thing about when Anansi is the instigator of the trouble, often Anansi does not triumph. So that becomes also a lesson in how to maneuver and live life. But the importance of the Anansi tale is its connection back to Africa, and the connection of what survives the terrible crossing into the Americas. And the Anansi tale is a real is significant evidence that a body can be captive, but consciousness can't be captive.
Exactly.
And that's the power of the Anansi tale in Caribbean culture. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And one more before Danny. Johnny Marbury asks, do you collaborate with any other artists in the creation of your work? I guess that's for
Well, usually it's a solo thing, but I did something for the DIA. When was it? Last year, where I was given this humongous space to engage the public, the general public, not just artists. And we had a fun time. People didn't want to leave. People were making things. There were kids. There were older people. There were, the curators themselves came in and they were on the floor and they were making my art, they were making layered things and using tape and so on. It was quite fun, while as a rule, I'm there with my paint or constructing things, carpeting or whatever. So usually it's by myself, but there are these occasions where it's it, it's I engage other people. There were times where there were dancers who interacted with the installations that I made extemporaneously on the wall, the dance company and so on. So yeah, so every now and again, rarely, it's not something I rule out. It's just a different situation.
For some reason, we have more questions, but well, Karen Baker says, I deeply appreciate the beauty and joy in your artwork.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If I do that, it's something.
So Danny,
and I just want to return briefly to Karen's question about Anansi and make sure you know, Karen, that on June 15th, surrounded by Carl's artwork, we're having a children's theater troupe do a performance of Anansi, performance of an Anansi story, Anansi the Trickster Spider. It's a children's theater group from Connecticut that's coming up to do this.
Fantastic.
Maybe Karen, you'll join us for that. Yeah, that should be really wonderful in that setting.
it's the team at Brattleboro again. Amazing.
They're on it.
Yeah. But Danny, what is your question?
Well, I mean, I have so many questions and thoughts occurred to me while I was listening to you, but the first one was I was struck by this to hear, Carl, that about your vision as a child, and then the experience of getting glasses and being able to not just, I mean, I guess it is fundamentally see more clearly, but it sounds almost like it had an impact on your ontological understanding of what there is in the world. There aren't just these blobs, but there are these different types of pieces that make up these blobs of color. And I find that so fascinating. And then to think about a person who has that powerful visual experience at a young age and then ends up being an artist engaged with color in the way you are and shapes. And I just wonder if that's something that you think has has played a role in your artwork and the way you approach shape and color, and also whether there are any aspects of seeing in your pre-glasses way that
well, I
you
can't
kind of
remember. It's hard to remember. I started wearing glasses so early, Actually, there's another phase now. As you notice, I'm not wearing glasses. And this is the first time in my life that I'm not wearing glasses. I just had these surgery that they put these implants or whatever, So this is different. I'm off to a different thing. I'm going into the world barefaced, and it feels funny, I adjust my glasses and say, "Oh wait, there's nothing there." So this is a third thing, I say that I say it's my second child. It's my second child, but without glasses. Yeah. So no, but
the question also was about whether that vision that you had impact or continues to impact you. And
yeah, I think in a very practical way, when I made my first the abstractions that I eventually made were about color, this amorphous glowing thing is about color and light and all these things, Maybe they related in a very abstract way to landscape, but it was about light and color and the big blobs, you know. So and when I did I did, you know, this reality things parallel to to uh to to the abstraction as a way of teaching myself. Um, I don't know if we saw the picture as the self-portrait, that there's a scar across my chest and so on.
Yeah,
You know,
I can show that. I can show that now actually. Let me see if I can, let me pull that out actually and show everyone that that's a striking one. Um, yeah.
And just as an aside, Carl, Grace writes, "This is the first time I've seen you without glasses ever. Hardly recognized you."
yeah. Now I should say this is Grace Gropp-Pollard, I think, who is a
Yeah.
fantastic portraitist, and she's sort of made portraits of me over the years, so I could see myself get wrinkly over time. So, but it's great. She's yes, she's seeing my bare face, you know, for the first time. But this portrait, this self-portrait, I was like 20 or 21 or something, and I was more or less documenting the scar across my chest here. But because that's sort of the root of everything. That's why we moved. That's why I did what I did as a child, right, and so on. That's why we moved from Guyana to the United States. That's why my life was sort of circumscribed in a certain way. Socially, in other ways, I'm a very quiet person. I don't run around. I don't whatever. You know, all these things are because it's all because of uh, that that scar right there. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I missed like I skipped an episode. Like, did I miss? Um, can you say more about that scar? Or
Well, the reason we left Guyana was I was born, I had a congenital uh, heart problem, a hole in the heart syndrome,
yeah,
and I was getting weaker and weaker, and my mom
yeah,
found a way to bring me to America.
that's
So that's the scar.
And also why just to give you a clue, Danny, this is why we're Carl kept talking about being in the house, and the mom kept saying, "Don't go out, don't go out," and of course Carl will go out and to make some clay, clay sculptures, and his mom will find out, but she'll ignore it. She won't to pretend
Right.
she hasn't seen it.
yeah.
And this is why reading was very important for Carl because
Mm.
as a sickly child, he was unable to socialize with other people. So he used books as a way to escape into the imagination. And so in my curatorial statement with Cantony, we talk about the idea of the interior landscape and the exterior landscape. Um, or that there is the landscape outside in Guyana, but there's a landscape inside, which is made up of all these books and all these travels and all these ways of seeing.
Yeah. And don't forget science fiction also. So
Mm.
the brain goes outwards into the universe, you know.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah.
for
Yeah, the
patiently
this the
explaining.
discussion made me think um the Black Canadian Trinidadian writer Dion Brand's most recent book, Salvage Readings from the Wreck, in which she returns to likely the kind of literature that you were reading,
Mhm.
and reads that literature
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
not just as a critique of white imagination, but she looks for all of the Black figures and Indigenous figures that appear in that literature but often don't get focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And then she reads those figures in ways that are beautiful and generative. There's a great chapter on Black writers who try to rewrite the Robinson Crusoe story. So she turns to
Mhm.
Shamwasdo and Coetzee and others who try to
Right.
rewrite that story. does a beautiful reading of it, and I see your art as a part of that Black Caribbean diaspora conversation.
Mhm.
Right. It's true because it after a while, I think once I moved over to America and was sort of sensitized as a black person, I was going to school one day, and this nice lady, white lady, stopped me in the street to admire my in Houston to admire my white teeth and to pat me on the head, say black people have such nice white teeth. I felt guilty because I didn't brush my teeth that morning. Out. But I guess well, she said Negroes have such nice white teeth, So I figured maybe, okay, so I'm a Negro. So, I looked for Negroes in the books, they were of a particular sort, you know. Uh, but all these things, this is experience. This is a life, you know.
So we want to end, and I'll just say very briefly, and to say that for me, it's working with Carl has been such a reminder of also where I come from, because the people who taught me, the people who raised me, and my grandparents, and my community, many of them were British educated, and it's kind of surprised me just how many similarities there are with being from another part of the world, and actually still having a very similar kind of education and reference, so but anyway, thank you so much everybody for joining us. I want to hand over to Danny. Yeah.
Well, Serubiri, thank you for bringing this experience to Brattleboro. Carl, thank you for making it possible. It was such a special, I mean, the whole opportunity to have the exhibition here and the life of the exhibition and all of the school groups and regular visitors who are coming and seeing the work. It's a gift that continues to give. But a very special moment within that arc was when you were here for a few days, building that
Ah,
wall piece on site. Um, so this has been so rich. And of course, tonight's conversation too. Thank you. And Rinaldo, thank you for joining and being part of this tonight.
Absolutely. I want to thank Ronaldo as well, and uh, for just reinforcing so many. I know you have so much else to say, of course, and we have to catch up so that I hear the rest.
Yes. I look forward to seeing Carl. I look forward to meeting you, Carl, sometime in person when I get to New York.
yes, 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 yes. I appreciate you guys so much. You and Sarah Berry and
In Canton.
right, and everybody. So thank you so much.
In that spirit, Emily Lambert, who's watching tonight, says, thank you, so incredible. Emily's a wonderful artist herself whose work is coming to our museum this summer. And she says, so incredible, love your work, Carl, and so enjoyed hearing you speak. Thank you, Emily. And I want to make sure to extend special thanks as well to Ivy Jones and the team at Wellencora Gallery, uh, who have provided invaluable support for the exhibition and this event tonight. Like from the very beginning, we could not possibly have pulled off any of this without their help. So thank you.
Exactly.
And thank you one more time to all of you out there tonight for joining us. If you find yourself in New England, I hope you'll come to the Brattleboro Museum to see Infinite Passage in person. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4, and admission is you pay whatever you wish. And Carl's work and the other 7 exhibitions that we have up now will be up through July 6th. And one last thing, that I'd be remiss if I didn't do, which is to say that if you enjoyed this event tonight and appreciate this kind of programming and would consider making a donation to the museum to support this type of free programming, or perhaps even become a member of the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, we would be so grateful for that. It's thanks to the generosity of lots of individuals that we're able to do the things we do. So thank you for considering that. You can just go to our website, brattleboromuseum.org, and click on support. One last time, Serubiri, Carl, Rinaldo, thank you so much. Phoebe, thank you for helping out behind the scenes. I hope our paths will cross again soon.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.